Well, evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Always good to see you. So come on in and find yourself a place around this here fire. We got it stoked up tonight, and the flames are higher, and the sparks are dancing in the air, and it's going to be a good one. I think most of us are just into the holidays, and there's Thanksgiving here, and Christmas around the corner, and there's rain, and there's snow, and it's cold. This is the time of year that sitting around the fire and telling stories are really kind of special. I got a story tonight about a crow. How many of you have known a crow? I had a friend that had a couple crows that, well, he would feed them out front of the house. He had lived up in the mountains. And the crows were so accepting of him, and well, he couldn't get close to him more than 15 feet or so. He didn't really try. But those crows would look out for him. They wouldn't let woodpeckers around his house, and they wouldn't let unknown crows come around and terrorize his cats. They kind of looked out for him, and all he had to do was feed him and talk to him every once in a while. And that's crows. So let me tell you this one about Silverspot. Now, this is from the book of Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton. Chapter 1. You all settled in there? How many of us have ever got to know a wild animal? I do not mean merely to meet with one once or twice or to have one in a cage, but to really know it for a long time while it's wild, and to get an insight into its life and its history. The trouble usually is to know one creature from his fellow. One fox or crow is so much like another that we cannot be sure that it really is the same one next time we meet it. But once in a while there arises an animal who is stronger or bigger or wiser than his fellow, who becomes a great leader, who is, as we should say, a genius. And if he is bigger or has some mark on which men can know him, he soon becomes famous in his country, and shows us that the life of a wild animal may be far more interesting and exciting than many of us human beings. Of this class were Cortant, the bob-tailed wolf that terrorized the whole city of Paris for about 10 years in the beginning of the 14th century. Then there was Clubfoot, the lame grizzly bear that led such a terrific record in the San Joaquin Valley of California. There was Lobo, the king wolf of New Mexico, that killed a cow every day for 5 years. And the Sione panther that in less than 2 years killed nearly 300 human beings. And such also was Silverspot, whose history, so far as I could learn it, I shall now briefly tell. Silverspot, simply put, was a wise old crow. His name was given because of all the silvery white spot. It was like a nickel stuck on the right side between the eye and the bill, and it was owing to the spot that I was able to know him from the other crows around, and I put together the parts of his history that came to my knowledge. Crows are, as you must know, our most intelligent birds. Wise as an old crow did not become a saying without a good reason. Crows know the value of organization and are as well drilled as any soldier. Very much better than some soldiers, in fact, for crows are always on duty, always at war, and always dependent on each other for life and safety. Their leaders not only are the oldest and the wisest of the band, but also the strongest and the bravest, for they must be ready at any time with sheer force to put down an upstart or a rebel. The rank and file are the youngsters and the crows without special gifts. Old Silverspot was the leader of a large band of crows that made their headquarters near Toronto, Canada, in Castle Frank, which is a pine-clad hill on the northeast edge of the city. Now, this band numbered about 200, and for reasons that I never understood, it really didn't increase. In mild winters, they stayed along the Niagara River. In cold winters, they went much farther south. But each year, in the last week of February, old Silverspot would muster his followers and boldly cross that 40 miles of open water that lies between Toronto and Niagara, Not, however, in a straight line would he go, but always a curve to the west, whereby he kept in sight of the familiar landmarks of Dundas Mountain until the pine-clad hill that's very self came into view. Each year he came up with his troop, and for about 6 weeks took up his abode on the hill. Each morning thereafter the crows set out in 3 bands to forage. One band of them went southeast to Ashbridge Bay. One of them went north up the Dawn, and one, the largest band, went northwestward up the ravine. The last, Silverspot, led in person. Who led the others? Well, I never found out. On calm mornings they flew high and straight away, but when it was windy, the band flew low and followed the ravine for shelter. Now, my windows overlooked the ravine, and it was thus that in 1885 I first noticed this old crow. I was a newcomer in the neighborhood, but an old resident had said to me then that there an old crow has been a-flying up and down the ravine for more than 20 years. My chances to watch were in the ravine and Silverspot doggedly clinging to the old route. Though now it was edged with houses and spanned by bridges, it became a very familiar acquaintance. Twice each day in March, part of April, then again in the late summer and the fall, he passed and he repassed, and he gave me chances to see his movements and hear his orders to his band, and so, little by little, opened my eyes to the fact that the crows, though they're a little creature, are of great wit, a race of birds with a language and a social system that is wonderfully human in many of its chief points, and in some is better carried out than our own. Well, one windy day I stood on the high bridge across the ravine, as that old crow, heading his long, straggling troop, came flying down homeward. Half a mile away I could hear the contented, "All's well, come right along," as we should say, or as he put it, and also his lieutenant echoed it at the rear of the band. So they were flying very low to be out of the wind, and would have to rise a little to clear the bridge on which I was. Silverspot saw me standing there, and as I was closely watching him, he didn't like it. He checked his flight, he called out, "Be on your guard," and rose much higher in the air. Then, seeing that I was not armed, he flew over my head about 20 feet, and his followers in turn did the same, dipping again to the old level when they were past the bridge. Next day I was at that same place, and as the crows came near I raised my walking stick and pointed it at them. The old feller at once cried out, "Danger," and rose 50 feet higher than before. And upon seeing that it was not a gun, he ventured to fly over, but on the 3rd day I took with me a gun, and at once he cried out, "Great danger, a gun!" His lieutenant repeated the cry, and every crow in the troop began to tower and scatter from the rest, till they were far above gunshot range, and they so passed safely over me, coming down again to the shelter of the valley, then well beyond reach. At another time, as the long, straggling troop came down the valley, a red-tailed hawk alighted on a tree close by their intended route. The leader cried out, "Hawk, hawk," and stayed his flight, as did each crow on nearing him, until all of them were massed in a single body. Then, no longer fearing the hawk, they passed on. But a quarter of a mile farther on, a man with a gun appeared below, and the cry, "Great danger, a gun, scatter for your lives," at once seized them to scatter widely and tower still far beyond range. Many others of his words of command I learned in course of my long acquaintance, and found that sometimes a very little difference in the sound makes a great difference in the meaning. Thus, while number 5 means hawk, or any large, dangerous bird, this means wheel around, evidently a combination of number 5, whose root idea is danger, and of number 4, whose root idea is retreat. And this again is a mere good day to a faraway comrade. This is usually addressed to the ranks and means attention. Early in April, there begin the great doings among the crows. Some new cause of excitement seems to have come on them. They spent half the day among the pines, and instead of foraging from dawn till dark, pairs and trios might be seen chasing each other, and from time to time they showed off in various feats of flight. A favorite sport was to dart down suddenly from a great height toward some perching crow, and just before touching it, to turn at a hair's breadth and rebound in the air so fast that the wings of the swooper whirred with the sound like distant thunder. Sometimes one crow would lower his head, raise every feather, and coming close to another would gurgle out a long note like, what did it all mean? I soon learned. They were making love and pairing off. The males were showing off their wing powers and their voices to the lady crows. And they must have been highly appreciated, for by the middle of April, all had mated and had scattered over the country for their honeymoon, leaving the somber old pines of Castle Frank deserted and silent. Chapter 2. The Sugarloaf Hill stands alone in the Dawn Valley. It was still covered with woods that joined those of Castle Frank. A quarter of a mile off into the woods, between the two hills, is a pine tree, in whose top was a deserted hawk's nest. Every Toronto schoolboy knows the nest, and excepting that I had once shot a black squirrel on its edge, no one had ever seen sign of life about it. There it was, year after year, ragged and old and fallen to pieces. Yet, strange to tell, in all that time, it never did drop to pieces like the other old nests. Well, one morning in May, I was out on a gray dawn and stealing gently through the woods, whose dead leaves were so wet that no rustle was made. I chanced to pass under that old nest, and I was surprised to see a black tail sticking over the edge of it. I struck the tree a smart blow. Off flew a crow, and the secret was out. I had long suspected that a pair of crows nested each year about the pines, but now I realized that it was Silverspot with his mate. The old nest was theirs, and they were too wise to give it an air of spring cleaning and housekeeping each year. Here they had nested for long, though guns in the hands of men and boys hungry to shoot crows were carried under their home every single day. I never surprised the fellow again, and though I several times saw him through my telescope. One day, while watching, I saw a crow crossing the Dawn Valley with something white in his beak. He flew to the mouth of the Rosedale Brook, then took a short flight to the beaver elm, and there he dropped the white object, and looking about, gave me a chance to recognize my old friend Silverspot. After a minute he picked up the white thing, it was a shell, and walked over past the spring, and here, among the docks and the skunk cabbages, he unearthed a pile of shells and other things, shiny things. He spread them out in the sun, turned them over, turned them one by one on his beak, dropped them, nestled on them as though they were eggs, toyed with them, and gloated over them like a miser. This was his hobby, his weakness. He could not have explained why he enjoyed them any more than a boy can explain why he collects postage stamps, or a girl why she prefers pearls to rubies. But his pleasure in them was very real, and after half an hour he covered them all up, including the new one, with earth and leaves, and he flew off. I went at once to the spot and examined the hoard. There was about a hatful in all, chiefly white pebbles, clamshells, and some bits of tin, but there was also the handle of a china cup, which must have been the gem of the collection. And that was the last time I saw them. You see, Silverspot knew that I had found his treasures, and he removed them at once. Well, where to, I never knew. During the space that I watched him so closely, he had many little adventures and escapes. He was once severely handled by a sparrowhawk, and often he was chased and worried by kingbirds. Not that these did him much harm, but they were such noisy pests that he avoided their company as quickly as possible, just as a grown man avoids a conflict with a noisy and impudent small boy. Now, he had some some cruel tricks, too. See, he had a way of going the round of a small bird's nest each morning to eat the new laid eggs, as regularly as a doctor visiting his patients. But we must not judge him for that, as it is just what we ourselves do to the hens in the barnyard. His quickness of wit was often shown. One day I saw him flying down that ravine with a large piece of bread in his bill. The stream below him was at this time being bricked over as a sewer. There was one part of 200 yards quite finished, and as he flew over the open water just above this, the bread fell from his bill and was swept by the current out of sight into the tunnel. He flew down and peered vainly into that dark cavern. Then, acting upon a happy thought, he flew to the downstream end of the tunnel and, awaiting the reappearance of the floating bread, as it was swept onward by the current, he seized and bore it off in triumph. Silverspot was a crow of the world. He was truly a successful crow. He lived in a region that, though full of dangers, abounded with food. In the old unrepaired nest he raised a brood each year with his mate, whom, by the way, I never could distinguish, and when the crows again gathered together, he was their acknowledged chief. The reassembling takes place about the end of June. The young crows, with their bobtails, soft wings, and falsetto voices, are brought by their parents, whom they're nearly equal in size, and introduced to society at the old pine woods, a woods that is at once their fortress and college. Here they find security in numbers and in lofty yet sheltered perches, and here they begin their schooling, and they're taught all the secrets of success in crow life. And in crow life, the least failure does not simply mean begin again. It means death. Now, the first week or two after their arrival is spent by the young ones in getting acquainted, for each crow must know personally all the others in the band. Their parents, meanwhile, have time to rest a little after the work of raising them, for now the youngsters are able to feed themselves and roost on a branch in a row, just like the big folks. In a week or two the molting season comes, and at this time the old crows are usually irritable and nervous, but it does not stop them from beginning to drill the youngsters, who of course did not much enjoy the punishment and nagging they get so soon after they have been Mama's own darling. But it is all for their own good. As the old lady said when she skinned the eels, the old Silverspot is an excellent teacher. Sometimes he seems to make a speech for 'em. What he says I can't guess, but judging by the way they receive it, it must be extremely witty. Each morning there is a company drill, for the young ones naturally drop into 2 or 3 squads according to their age and their strength, and the rest of the day they forage with their parents. When at length September comes, we find a great change. The rabble of silly little crows have begun to learn sense. The delicate blue iris of their eyes, the sign of a full crow, has given place to the dark brown of the old stager. They know their drill now. They've learned sentry duty. They've been taught guns and traps and taken a special course in wire worms and green corn. They know that a fat old farmer's wife is much less dangerous, though so much larger than her 15-year-old son, and they can tell the boy from his sister. They know that an umbrella is not a gun, and they can count up to 6, which is fair for young crows, though Silverspot can go up to nearly to 30. They know the smell of gunpowder and the south side of a hemlock tree, and begin to plume themselves upon being crows of the world. They always fold their wings 3 times before alighting, to be sure that it is nearly done. They know how to worry a fox into giving up half his dinner, and also that when the kingbird or the purple martin assails them, they must dash into a bush, for it is impossible to fight the little pests as it is for the fat apple woman to catch the small boys who have raided her basket. All these things do the young crows know, but they have taken no lesson in egg hunting yet, for it's not the season. They are unacquainted with clams, never tasted horses' eyes, or seen sprouted corn. And they don't know a thing about travel, the greatest educator of all. They did not think of that 2 months ago, and since they have thought of it, but have learned to wait till their betters are ready. September sees a great change in the old crows, too. Their molting is over. They're now in full feather again and proud of their handsome coats. Their health is again good, and with it their tempers are improved. Even old Silverspot, the strict teacher, becomes quite jolly, and the youngsters, who have long ago learned to respect him, begin really to love him. He has hammered away at drill, teaching them all the signals and the words of command in use, and now it is a pleasure to see them in the early morning. Company 1, the old chieftain would cry and crow, and Company 1 would answer with a great clamor. Fly, and himself leading them, they would all fly straight forward. Mount, and straight upward they turned in a moment. Bunch, and they all massed into a dense black flock. Scatter, and they spread out like leaves before the wind. Form a line, and they strung out the long line of ordinary flight. Descend, and they all dropped nearly to the ground. Forage, and they alighted and scattered about to feed, while 2 of the permanent sentries mounted duty, one on a tree to the right and the other on a mound to the far left. A minute or 2 later, Silverspot would cry out, "A man with a gun!" The sentries repeated the cry. The company flew at once in open order as quickly as possible toward the trees, and once behind these they formed line again in safety and returned to the home pines. Sentry duty is not taken in turn by all the crows, but a certain number whose watchfulness has been often proved are the perpetual sentries and are expected to watch and forage at the same time. Rather hard on them, it seems to us, but it works well, and the crow organization is admitted by all birds to be the very best in existence. Finally, each November sees the troop sail away southward to learn new modes of life, new landmarks, and new kinds of food under the guidance of the ever-wise Silverspot. Chapter 3. There is only one time when a crow is a fool, and that is at night. There is only one bird that terrifies the crow, and that is the owl. When, therefore, these come together, it is a woeful thing for the sable birds. The distant hoot of an owl after dark is enough to make them withdraw their heads from under their wings, sit trembling and miserable till morning. In the very cold weather and the exposure of their faces, thus has often resulted in a crow having one or both of his eyes frozen, so that blindness followed, and therefore death. There are no hospitals for sick crows. But with the morning their courage comes again, and arousing themselves, they ransack the woods for a mile around till they find that owl, and if they do not kill him, they at least worry him half to death and drive him 20 miles away. In 1893, the crows had come as usual to Castle Frank. I was walking in these woods a few days afterward when I chanced upon the track of a rabbit that had been running at full speed over the snow and dodging about among the trees as though pursued. Strange to tell, I could see no tracks of the pursuer. I followed the trail and presently saw a drop of blood on the snow, and a little farther on found the partly devoured remains of the little brown bunny. What had killed him was a mystery until a careful search showed in the snow a great double-toed track and a beautifully penciled brown feather. Then all was clear, a horned owl. Half an hour later, in passing again by the place, there, in a tree within 10 feet of the bones of the victim, was that fierce-eyed owl himself. The murderer still hung about the scene of his crime. For once, circumstantial evidence had not lied. At my approach, he gave a guttural grrroo and flew off with low flagging flight to haunt that distant somber woods. 2 days afterwards, at dawn, there was a great uproar among the crows. I went out early to see and found some black feathers drifting over the snow. I followed up the wind in that direction from where they came, and soon saw the bloody remains of a crow and the great double-toed track, which again told me that the murderer was the owl. All around were signs of the struggle. but the fell destroyer was too strong. The poor crow had been dragged from his perch at night when the darkness put him in a hopeless disadvantage. I turned over the remains and by chance unburied the head, then started with an exclamation of sorrow. Alas! It was the head of old Silverspot. His long life of usefulness to his tribe was over. Slain at last by the owl that he had taught so many hundreds of young crows to beware of. The old nest on the sugar loaf is abandoned now. The crows still come in springtime to Castle Frank, but without their famous leader, their numbers are dwindling. And soon they will be seen no more about the old pine grove in which they and their forefathers had lived and learned for ages. Well, that's the story of crows. Old Silverspot. They are a wise bird. Yep, I've seen them a few times and had them follow me on the ground while I was hunting, just giving away my cover as I was walking about. Don't know that much about them, but I sure have seen them a lot in the woods. They're smart. Folks, this evening's coming to an end. I'm getting tired. I'm looking forward to one of those cowboy caramels. I've seen a box of them over there by the fire. I'm going to head over and get me one. You too can get some. There's 12 different flavors. They're all natural. Ginger makes them and they're just wonderful. Look in the store there and we've got them. And at that, I'm going to go on, get my caramel and get something in my mug and go say hi to some friends. Well, I'll see you again here and we'll tell some more stories. I really like that. Here around the campfire with me, Clay Steele. Good night.
This Thanksgiving, Clay and I want to take a moment to thank all of you, our listeners, for being part of our journey. Whether you've joined us around the campfire or explored the hidden corners of your mind through our stories, your support means everything to us. We're grateful for the laughter, the shared mysteries, and the warmth of this incredible community. May your day be filled with good food, great stories, and the people who make life special. Happy Thanksgiving from our campfire to yours.